This week, the international community has really rallied together against Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and Russia looked really isolated in a vote of the UN General Assembly. But two really important countries abstained in that vote, China and India. Well, I want to take a closer look at India's position today because it's really fascinating. Why is it still trying to stay on the fence in the face of everything that's happening? Well, I spoke to Happymon Jacob. He's one of India's most prominent foreign policy thinkers. He's a professor at JNU University in Delhi, and he also hosts the National Security Conversations on YouTube. So I started by asking him to describe what position India has been taking in this crisis so far.
So far, India has taken a very cautious and careful position on the Ukraine crisis or Russia's invasion of Ukraine, if I may put it more bluntly. I say that because India has not really supported the Russian invasion. India has also not really condemned the Russian invasion of Ukraine. What India has done is pretty interesting. India has abstained from and voting on a resolution at the UN Security Council, which called for the condemnation of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, but qualified that with a note of explanation. And the note of explanation very clearly says that it is not a good idea to violate the sovereignty of other countries. It is not a good idea to go into war. Dialogue needs to be promoted, diplomatic solutions need to be found, etc., etc., which means it is saying all the right things while at the same time not outrightly condemning the Russian aggression against Ukraine. So to my mind, this is interesting because this is also a subtle evolution from the position that India had taken in 2014 when Russia had invaded Crimea. At that point of time, we had some voices within the Indian government which sort of said that there are legitimate Russian interests in Crimea or in the neighborhood, meaning that it's not all black and white, as it were. But that position has changed. India is not referring to any more the legitimate Russian interests in the neighborhood. So that's not happening. India is sort of abstaining from it. India is not voting against it, but it is caveating by saying that these kind of actions are not really good for the international community and health of the international system. So, in my opinion, therefore, it's a very carefully thought out, caveated, and cautious position.
Yeah, I mean, but I suppose some people in the outside world are looking at what India is doing and looking at the world's largest democracy and thinking, well, isn't India trying to have it both ways by sort of saying some mildly critical sounding things, but at the end of the day then abstaining in the UN Security Council and in the UN General Assembly. Can you explain where India is coming from on this? Because what we have to understand is India's very long-standing close relationship with Russia. Can you put it in that context?
That's right. I mean, to begin with, I believe that Indians did not think that Russia was going to go this far. To that extent, I would sort of venture into saying that perhaps the Russians misguided the Indian leaders as well. India did not think that Russia was going to get into an all-out attack against Ukraine or an invasion of Ukraine. I think the feeling here was, if I understood that correctly, was that, yeah, it's going to be a military stand-up. It's going to be some sort of, military signaling, a little bit of kinetic action. No one expected in Delhi that the attack would actually go beyond the two republics, as it were, that it actually get into Kiev, the manner in which it is unfolding. So that's sort of one point to keep in mind when we understand the Indian position so far. But to sort of come back to the larger question that you asked about, what explains, broadly speaking, the Indian stand on Russia, the so-called subtle, as I sort of put it in one of my pieces the other day, that India has subtly supported the Russian sort of aggression or the Russian position at this point of time. And to my mind, this is a function of the strategic vulnerability that India is placed in at this point of time. Now, today, if you look at the geographical location where India is located in at this point of time, we are next door to China, and China from 2020 onwards has been territorially very aggressive towards India. We have an ongoing conflict from the line of actual control with China. China has been irredentist, has been making irredentist claims. For example, it has been asking for an Indian state called the Arunachal Pradesh. So given that sort of a context, in the entire continental space in India, you have what do we have? We have China on the one hand, you have Pakistan on the one hand, we have Taliban and Afghanistan on the other hand, we have Iran. None of these states are actually friends with India. So the only reliable partner that India has in this very unfriendly environment that India is sort of located in is the Russian Federation. So Russia has been kind to India, Russia has been good to India, Russia has supported India in a variety of ways, including providing India with the arms supplies, military supplies as and when India required. During the 2020 crisis with China that India had, when the Chinese were attacking the Indian position on the line of actual control, the Indian defense minister went to Moscow, placed orders for new weapons, and in fact, India sees Moscow as an honest mediator should there be a future crisis between India and China. So whichever way you look at it, historically, from the point of view of being an honest mediator, from the context of being a friend in an unfriendly neighborhood, a country that can perhaps reason with China on China's aggression towards India, in all of these ways, India views Russia as a very, very important partner, and Russia has actually exhibited that it is a reliable partner. Now comes the other side, which is India's close relationship with the United States and the other Western partners. If you look at the Indian history today, you will see that India is perhaps closest to the United States of America today than ever before in its history. India is a part of the Quad agreement with understanding with the United States, Japan, and Australia. India has been conducting naval exercises called the Malabar exercises with all of these countries. India has taken big into the whole Indo-Pacific construct. So you're looking at a certain amount of dualism in the Indian strategic thinking today. On the one hand, you have the very unfriendly continental sphere. On the other hand, you have the maritime sphere, where India believes it has an opportunity to sort of break out of the continental sort of claustrophobia that it feels today. Now, so it needs both the partners. It needs the Russians, it needs the Americans and the Western partners. Now, India is caught in that kind of a bind. So what do? You tend to, therefore, take a middle position. And the safest middle position that India could have taken is to abstain by caveating that we don't like aggression and we don't like wars.
I mean, it is a fascinating situation that India finds itself in here, but how sustainable do you think this kind of straddling these different realms is going to be as the world geopolitical situation is changing at the moment? So you mentioned that India kind of relies on Russia to balance against China, but Russia and China, we've seen, are getting much, much closer together. Also, the Americans are kind of drumming up, you mentioned it, through the Quad, and also in Europe as well, this idea of kind of entering into a new phase of a sort of battle of the systems between autocratic powers and democratic powers. Do you see these shifts coming up as forcing India to make a kind of choice at some point, whether it's with the autocrats or with the democrats?
I think that's a very interesting question. Thank you for asking me that. I think the initial reactions from India supporting, quote unquote, quasi-supporting Russia emanated from the sort of context that I sort of painted for you just now. But I think as things unfold, things will continue to get more complicated for India. In fact, it is getting complicated even for China. Look at it this way. Today, Vladimir Putin and the Russian Federation seem very isolated in the international system. Even China, a close ally of the Russian Federation, is not really standing by China. China also abstained. China did not really vote against it. What does that tell you? That basically tells you is that people or countries are actually rethinking their positions. It's an evolving situation, and as things unfold, I think there will be a lot of rethinking in China. There will be a lot of rethinking in India. As for India, I think the longer the conflict persists, the more the bloodshed that takes place in Ukraine, and the more resolve the international community shows in pushing back Putin from Ukraine, I think India will have to sort of evolve its position as well. I don't think the support that India has given to Russia so far is an unqualified one. I think the support that has been given so far is on basis on the belief that this is probably going to end sometime very soon. There will be a quick end to it one way or the other. But if it persists, and it from what I hear, what I understand, this is going to persist, this is going to go on for some time, I think India will have no choice but to sort of take a relook at its own positions. And you are so right. So far, the Americans have been quite understanding of the Indian position and basically, have not really pushed India to the wall. But there will be a time when the Americans will and the Western partners will tell India, wait a minute, you can't sort of continue to play both sides. You'll have to take a pick. You will have to make a choice. I think the time will come at some point of time. And when that time comes, I think the Indian leaders will have a tough task on their hands. It is not going to be easy for them to give up on Russia. But it is also looking at what China is doing. It is looking at what some of Russia's other partners are doing. But I think it is going to become difficult for India to justify this stand going forward. Three important abstentions from UN Security Council and the UN General Assembly. That's a lot. Should there be another occasion, it will be difficult for India. In fact, if you look at the explanatory notes that the Indian representative at the UN Security Council has been providing, the first note was less accusatory. Let's say was less harsh about Russia. The one that was issued last night was actually more harsh. So you will see that tone getting harsher as we go along, in my opinion.
And what do we know about what Narendra Modi will be saying to Putin privately? Can you just tell me a little bit about their relationship? Do they have a good relationship? And what do you think Modi will be saying to Putin behind the scenes? Will he be saying, you've got to stop this soon?
I think, let me put it this way. The two leaders are pretty close. They share a very warm relationship. As you know, Putin made the only, foreign visit after the onset of COVID, and that was to India in December last year. We had a 2+2 meeting. In fact, India and Russia have a very, very an excellent relationship, and the two leaders share a very warm personal relationship as well. And the two leaders have been talking to each other, but from what we know from open sources, the talk has primarily been about one, getting the Indian nationals in Ukraine safely back home to India, and two, the Russians have been also providing some information to India about how to relocate Indian nationals, and almost as you're providing some intelligence on what to tell the Indian nationals in Ukraine, where not to go and where to go, etc. But it's possible that privately Mr. Modi would be reasoning with Mr. Putin, but I am not sure if Putin is in a mindset to listen to some reason from other leaders. Putin seems to be isolated. He seems to be running out of options. Or the oligarchs seem to be turning against him. So he's in a very tight spot. And I'm not. And as a politician, Mr. Modi would know not to advise a leader who is looking for support and who is already isolated. So perhaps I don't think there will be a great deal of wisdom from the land of Buddha and Gandhi reaching Putin at this point of time.
And while India is still on the fence in this situation, is there a way that it could turn that to something positive? Is there any potential for India to provide any kind of mediation, for example?
Absolutely. I think that opportunity certainly existed early on in the crisis when the attack was still unfolding a few days ago, almost a week ago. The Ukrainian ambassador to India almost pleaded with the Indian Prime Minister that he should speak to Mr. Putin, mediate with Mr. Putin, not to carry out the assault that he is planning to or already starting to carry out. I think given the fact that India is perhaps close to the United States and the West, as well as to Russia, and even to Ukraine for that matter, India had the opportunity, which probably was not available to any other country, including China. And the United Nations is unable to do anything. So India was probably uniquely placed and perhaps the only country that was placed in a similar situation to offer some good counsel to both sides and provide some mediation, provide some back channel negotiations. But unfortunately, the Indians haven't done that. I think the Indian focus has so far been on one, the tightrope walking, and two, getting our personnel, getting our people home, because we have local elections coming up in India. So if more Indians get killed, and one boy was killed the other day, if more Indians get killed in a foreign land, that could reflect badly on the Prime Minister and the political party in office. So they haven't taken the opportunity that was readily available to them so far. But even today, to my mind, although one could potentially argue that train may have left the station, but I still believe if Mr. Modi wants to send a special envoy to Kiev, to Moscow, and to Washington, that opportunity still exists, and all three capitals will perhaps welcome such a special envoy for some much needed mediation at this point of time.
And just to touch on public opinion, you talk about, those elections coming up. Is there any sign of public opinion, becoming a bigger issue in criticizing this war? I mean, mostly we've been talking about India's interests in trying to balance this very dicey position geopolitically. At what point may public outrage at the violence become a major factor within India?
Unfortunately, the war against Ukraine by Russia is seen in India as somebody else's war. It is not seen as a war that India has, any role to play. It will have any implications for India directly. So Indians do not see this as a fight where we have any stakes at all. So to that extent, the public, perception or the opinion so far has been, we go to safeguard our interests. We go to sort of watch out for what China might, how China might take the opportunity and, get into some misadventures on the line of actual control. We need to make sure that our people are back home in one piece. I think these are the overriding concerns of the media as well as the public imagination. At this point of time, there hasn't been much public outrage or outcry about, one, India supporting Russia, or two, about what Putin is doing in Ukraine. It is something that is happening in Europe. It's Europe's problem. It's not really our problem. That's been the overriding perception so far.
Finally, Happymon, I'd just like to ask a kind of a stepping back big picture question again. I mean, if we look at India, its economy is roughly double the size of Russia's economy now. Why is India still behaving so cautiously? Why is it not acting like the senior partner in the relationship with Russia and telling it kind of which way to go? Why is it not being bolder on the international stage with offers of mediation and so on? Wouldn't this be a perfect opportunity for India to show to the world that it is a power that has some meaningful weight in the world?
You are absolutely right on that. I mean, I think if I were advising a policymaker in India, I would have said precisely that. One, that this is an opportunity for India to show the world that we can be of some utility and use to peace and to building peace in the international system, stability in the international system, that we should behave like a major power, a big power, an emerging power. We are able to, we can do that. We have a wherewithal to do that. But I think the Indian political elite and the Indian diplomatic elite, foreign policy elite, are both very risk averse. They insofar as possible, they do not want to get caught in uncomfortable situations. They don't want to put their dog in a fight where they think it is somebody else's fight. The age of the age of Indian internationalism in the 1950s and 1960s, when Nehru was still alive. We don't have that milieu anymore in India. It's all about interest. It's not about trying to sort of make the world a better place. That thinking doesn't really sort of echo in the corridors of power in today's in contemporary India, as it were. Now, on the question of Russia is perhaps in terms of economic might smaller than India, for sure. But I think, as I explained earlier, we are not really looking at Russia particularly. I think the Indians are looking at China while they're looking at Russia. So the focus is not Russia. The focus is China. So let's be very, very, very clear about that. It is not any unadulterated love for Russia that is keeping the Indians awake at night. It is basically the worry about what China might do next that is keeping the Indians awake at night.
Happymon Jacob, thank you so much for talking to us on DW today. It's really a fascinating situation, and we'll be following it closely here on DW. Look forward to speaking to you again sometime soon.
Great pleasure, Richard. Wonderful talking to you.